It is my pleasure now to introduce you to one of our first speakers this afternoon. He's here all the way from Southern California, Dave Gash. He's the owner of Hypertrain, a Southern California firm that specializes in technology consulting and training for hypertext developers. He's got over 30 years of experience and degrees in business and computer science. He's very well known in the technical publications community as an interesting and engaging instructor. He's also had a success with his first self-published science fiction novel. He's a frequent speaker at user assistance conferences and seminars both in the US and around the world, and we brought him back to New Zealand by popular demand. Dave Gash.
Thanks, Em. Boy, that's going to be hard to live up to. Not to overstate or anything. Okay, well, here we all are. Nice to see you. And thanks to Steve and Roy and everybody at TCANS for having me in. Let's see. If you've not seen me present before, you may be in for a surprise. I won't say treat. This is a rather non-Cody session. I was just talking with Sarah. Sarah is here ostensibly to heckle. I'm kind of a Cody sort of guy, and my presentation tomorrow on HTML5 user annotations is rather Cody technical in that way. And this is a non-Cody presentation, and so it's sort of out of my comfort zone. It's more along the lines of high-level concepts and that sort of thing. In fact, I was just thinking just moments ago that having seen Howard's presentation in here about fuzzwords, and then was it Cindy's on does grammar matter? I'm very nearly too depressed to carry on, because that was both of those presentations were spot on about the sorry state of communication, and it seems like we're preaching to the crowd, because we all stand up here and talk about grammar matters and, punctuation matters and so on. And everybody, all you folks out there, go like this. Yes, it does. And then, we talk to our kids and they're texting back and forth, and none of it makes a bloody lick of sense to us. So that's kind of troubling. However, I'm going to push on, just as though that weren't really happening, and talk about controlled language as a subject, kind of as a concept, and talk about some rules and ideas, and introduce you to some software toward the end of the presentation. Now, okay, that's me. I already talked about that. We'll move on. Okay, so what we're going to talk about is, why do we need controlled language? What is it? Why would we want to use it? What can we hope to gain from it? That sort of thing. And how to adopt it and use it in our own work. And then as I say, toward the end, then I'll give you some references, and we'll talk a little bit about software. But first, I have to tell you a true story. Now, I sometimes say that all my stories are true, even the made-up ones, but I swear to you, this is a true story. I'm a fairly experienced traveler. I've been doing this a long time. And one of the things that I like to do when I check into a hotel is I try to make sure that they don't overcharge me, that they don't charge me for things that I don't use. Meals I don't eat, movies I don't watch, in particular, porn movies that I don't watch, because they will do that. I mean, like I'm going to watch porn on the hotel TV anyway, right? I mean, that's what the wireless broadband is for. Am I right? Okay. But I digress. Anyway, so one of the things I do when I check into a hotel is I try to get them to just turn off the porn channel in my room, and that way, if I know that it's turned off for the duration of my stay, they can't possibly charge me for movies that I don't watch. So, a couple of years ago, I was checking into a hotel, and I think this was in Melbourne, actually, over on the West Island. You guys are familiar with that area? I was checking into a hotel in Melbourne. Let's just put the big X there. And I wanted to make sure that the porn channel would be turned off in my room. So as I was checking in, filling in my form, I said to the nice young gentleman at the desk, by the way, can you tell me, is the porn channel in my room disabled? And he looked at me a bit funny, but straight away he said, "Nah, Mike, it's just regular porn." Swear to God, that's a true story. And that story sort of points out, rather embarrassingly for my part, because he thought, my God, those Yanks are pervs. Jesus. And of course, he's correct. We are. That points out that using a similar word in two different ways is a great way to impede communication. If we had used that word in one way or the other, but not both, that problem would not have occurred, and he wouldn't have thought that all Yanks were pervs. So that little story does actually lead us into controlled language, and that's where we're going here. So what is the idea of controlled language? Well, it's standardized and limited language is really what it's all about. We want to use a standardized set of terms, and we want to limit the number of words that we use and the way that we use them. The concept is really kind of a far-flung extension of style guides. If you think of what a style guide does for you, controlled language guide does that, only sort of in spades. It really tells you what you can and cannot say. One of the important things about controlled language is that it is a natural language. It's not a contrived language or an invented language. Natural language is just natural English, only restricted, limited in the way that we use it. It differs from our general language in these four ways. The grammar and style rules are greatly simplified. There's a greatly limited set of words and meanings and approved meanings that we can use. There is a rather large thesaurus of unapproved synonyms and meanings, and disabled in that case would be one of those on the unapproved list. And there are guidelines that help you add new terms, that give you a way to go into your rules and add new terms and put them in your concordance and so on. We'll talk about all this stuff as we go through it. Now, this is the required history slide, and I promise I'm not going to bore you with this. This is what I really find interesting about history slides is nothing. So, real quickly, started back in 1932 when this guy named Ogden tried to promote what he called basic English. And that sort of progressed through a lot of different forms until the early 2000s when this ECMA thing became ASD. And SE, Simplified English, became STE, Simplified Technical English. So really, about the only thing you need to pay attention to here is ASD, STE. That's really what is used today as the basis for controlled language, at least in English. There are, of course, other attempts at controlled languages in other languages, but English is the de facto technical standard. So STE 100 is the current specification that covers this. See, we just blew right past that history slide. All right. Why do we need controlled language? That's really a good question because, you know, being a bit flipper, being a Cody kind of guy, I tend to adopt technologies and techniques because I can. And that's not really always a good reason. So we should probably have some very good reasons why we want to use controlled language. The first reason is that English is not, and it never has been, a pure language. English is one of the hardest languages on earth to read. It's third or fourth. Turkish is easier to learn than English. Swahili is easier to learn than English. French, for Christ's sake, is easier to learn than English. And as you well know, in French, you only pronounce every third or fourth letter on alternate days of the week when there's a full moon. So even that is much easier to learn than English. So we have, and I don't mean to run down English as a language, our richness comes from that diversity of vocabulary. English is a rich language because it's a diverse language and complex. But technical documentation is already complex and confusing. One of my favorite quotes here is from a personality called James Nichol, and you may have heard this one. James Nichol said, "English isn't pure. It doesn't just borrow words. It pursues other languages down dark alleyways, beats them unconscious, and rifles their pockets for loose vocabulary." Great quote. And so true. We steal from all kinds of languages, and that makes English complex, but it also makes it highly flexible and powerful, and that's where we get that power. The problems with complexity and confusion are these. Complexity in a document frustrates our users, first and foremost. And remember, and we We joke around a lot about our dumb users, but who do we really do this for? We don't do it for ourselves, and we don't do it for our bosses, we don't do it for our companies. Really, really honest to Pete, who do we do this stuff for? Don't get this wrong. Thank you. Our users, of course. When our documents are overly complex, it frustrates our users who are trying to read our material and comprehend the meaning. It overworks us as writers because we're writing documents that are more complex than they need to be. It overloads translators, and I'm going to hit translation a couple of times more in the course of this presentation because translation localization is really important. When our documents are complex, then they become confusing. And when they're confusing, mostly that's a dollars issue because confusing documentation tends to raise costs all over the place. It raises legal costs and risks, raises safety concerns, support costs, translation costs. Again, translation is a big issue. So it's safe to say that if you had documents, and Sarah and I were just talking about this, if you had documents that are read in different places by different people, if they comprehend them the same way, then that standardized vocabulary benefits everybody, all the way from writers to translators to readers. Now, there's another little example here of confusion. And if you can't read that, I'll read this little snippet for you from a news report. On a nearby airport, an airplane made a disastrous attempt to abort the landing after pilots realized there was a vehicle on the runway. The vehicle was a snowplow whose operator had been told to clear the runway for the arrival of the aircraft, and that's what he was bloody well doing, clearing the runway. But a little problem there with vocab, clear being used in two different ways, all right? You would think in that specific situation they would not do that, but they did. So that was a problem. So clearly a normalized, standardized vocabulary benefits everybody and prevents little problems and big. Now, I'm going to list a whole bunch of advantages of controlled language at several different levels. And I'll try to kind of blow through these fairly quickly rather than belabor them, as I'm wont to do. At the corporate level, controlled language can save a lot of money in development and maintenance and translation. In fact, as you can see from the little bullet down here at the bottom, translation is oftentimes the major reason that companies implement controlled language, because they can, with controlled language documents, they can send those documents off to be translated and get them back in a more standardized and more coherent and cohesive form. So that's a big deal for companies that do a lot of localization. Controlled language is a big, big money saver for those companies. It also, speaking of translation, opens up documents to machine translation. When you use words and phrases consistently and accurately throughout your documents, throughout not just a document, but across documents, then you can machine translate those documents much, much more accurately. And that's a big deal. Also at the corporate level, STE has international acceptance, and there's a standardized framework. So if you're working in English in France or Germany or South Africa or the United States or Australia, you have a standardized set of rules and guidelines to go by. And STE is flexible. You can integrate these ideas, whether you're using e-learning, SCORM, or if you're working in XML or DITA or some help authoring tool like AuthorIt or Flare or XMetal or whatever, or if you're using CMSs, you can integrate these techniques in with what you already do without just completely uprooting your entire workflow. So that's a good thing. Now at the author level, just for you and me actually writing content, controlled language makes single sourcing far, far easier. You can write paragraphs once, store them, and then use them by reference multiple times and not have to write them over and over and over in slightly different ways, which is, of course, a problem. I say here, it reduces word count. We're going to see some examples here in a few minutes where frequently using controlled language will actually increase your word count in certain instances, but overall it reduces it. So that's a broad stroke statement, but you'll see some examples here where you say, wait, that's more words, and you'll be correct. Smaller documents, of course, means that you can write faster because you know what the words are to use and use them correctly and use them consistently. And when you have rules and regulations like an Uber style guide to go by, then you have better quality assurance. Editors can look at a document and edit that document and check it much faster because they don't have to interpret everything in their head that the writers are trying to say because it's more controlled. That's the idea of it being controlled language. So your document review process is faster and easier. At the technical level, controlled language, again, eases the process of machine translation. There's lots of machine translation software out there, some of it good, some of it not so good, but regardless of which one you may use, it will perform better if your documents are consistent. If your documents use the same terminology in the same ways, in the same constructs all the time, machine translation will work better. If you do any format conversion, like after the document is written, and by format conversion I mean usually using XSLT to translate an XML document to HTML or an XML format to a different XML format and so on, then that becomes simpler because your language is consistent and correct. When I say retrievability here, what I mean by that is integration with content management systems. When you have paragraphs and phrases and words that are stored once in your CMS and then referred to multiple times, included by reference, in other words, transcluded, we call it in XML, then you have a lot easier time trying to reuse chunks of information that you don't have to write over and over and over again. And that's a good thing as well. And I said this a moment ago, you can, I don't know why I'm pointing when I have a laser, especially because I'm short and I can't reach that. You can adopt controlled language techniques without completely disrupting what you currently do in your office. And so it's not something you have to, call a moratorium on writing for 6 months in order to learn and implement. You can do this a piece at a time. And finally, most importantly, actually, at the user level, documents that are written in controlled language are easier to read and understand. And that's the big deal, is it not? Everybody go like this. That is the big deal, is your documents are easier to read and comprehend. And, once again, as Sarah and I were talking about, if you have a document that's written in controlled English, and it's being read by an American English speaker and a French English speaker and a South African English speaker, those people are all going to comprehend the content in the same way because the words always mean the same thing, and they're always used that way. And I'm going to show you some examples here in just a minute. So those are big deals for the users. All right. It wouldn't be fair if I didn't throw out some disadvantages to controlled language, so I have to mention that. First of all, there's resistance to change. And this is often a management factor, and you guys know this as well as anybody. Anytime you try to introduce a new technology or a new piece of software or a new idea, management is always against it because we've always done it the other way. And that's kind of understandable, but for something that really works well, like controlled language, this is something that you kind of have to get over. You have to get management over that. It is time consuming, I'll give you that. It does take some time to understand how this works and to get the instructions and sort of implement your own plan. And I'm going to go through all that here presently. It does require some expenditure. You have to buy some software, or at least you should buy some software. You don't have to. And you absolutely have to train your employees in this, and I'll talk about that in a few moments as well. But management is only part of the issue because you also have resistance to change at the author level. And this generally boils down to a loss of perceived control over the document content. I see some folks nodding like, yes, I've seen that, or maybe, yes, I've experienced that. One of the things that controlled language does is it sort of takes away your ability as an author to be creative in your documentation, to write aesthetically pleasing pages that look nice and flow well, to be nuanced and to have finesse in your wording. And I have one thing to say about that, and it's a little bit blunt, but bear with me. If you want to write documents with nuance and finesse that have a lot of creativity and aesthetics in them, get the hell out of technical writing and write a bloody novel. That's where you can do that. Those things don't have a place in technical writing. We need to be detailed, we need to be specific, we need to be accurate, and we need to be consistent. Those things are not creative and intuitive. All right? Don't do that. Thank you very much for realizing that that's a true thing. Okay? Now, all that aside, I can't argue that there are some disadvantages to trying to implement any new technology, and certainly controlled languages in there. But the benefits do outweigh the downsides. And I'm going to try to talk some more now just about some of the ways that we can grab this technology and make it work for us. Now, first of all, I've been talking about STE here for a little while as though that were the only thing out there. And it isn't really, but it's the best thing out there, and here's why. Why should we use STE as our basis for a controlled language initiative? Well, because the specification is derived from military and aerospace technologies. And those guys, I mean, if anybody really seriously needs specificity, it's those guys. You've got to say exactly what you mean, and things have to mean exactly the right thing, and they have to mean the same thing every time in the military and in defense and aerospace. So STE comes from those environments, and so it's a good solid basis of people that really care like a lot about specificity, and so that's a good thing. It's also now an international standard. Again, if you are working in English in France or Germany or Great Britain or the United States or Australia or New Zealand, you can use these specifications and they will work. It is not just a set of specifications that's thrown out and not worked on. STE is constantly updated and maintained. There's a working group in STE that maintains the specification and improves it and enhances it as changes come along and as people raise issues and so on. It's extensible for new environments. In other words, although it comes from military and aerospace, it's extensible to software and hardware documentation, which is, of course, what we would use it for. And, of course, a big benefit is it's already out there. We don't have to make this crap up. We don't have to go out and figure out how to do this ourselves. It's already out there. It exists, and it's already available. So why not just use something that's out there and works? So let's look at a few of the rules just to kind of give you a flavor of what you might want to do in a controlled language. Some of the STE rules are like use the active voice. Say we recommend instead of it is recommended that. Right? Use articles. Don't say purchase wrench. Say purchase the wrench. Use the articles because they make sentences clear. Use simple verb tenses. Use put and go rather than going and putting and so on, wherever possible. Avoid noun clusters. This is one of my favorites. We Americans especially love noun clusters. And here's a really good one, rear door lock housing. Now, kind of that makes sense, but it's 4 nouns strung together to mean one thing. And it's just horrifying that we do that, and we do it all the time. That's 1 noun and 3 other nouns that are sort of used as adjectives, and you have to work backward to figure out what it means. You cannot work forward and work this out. You have to work backward. It's a housing that a lock is in, and that lock is present in a door, and it's the rear door. You have to work backward just to figure out what the hell that means. It's terrible, and we do it all the time. Yanks are especially bad at this. So you want to avoid noun clusters like that. And you should write short sentences and short paragraphs. Now, you're probably saying to yourself, well, these are pretty much decent rules that we're, meant to follow most of the time anyway, right? These are not brand new to you, are they? If they are, you're doing it wrong. Okay, surely these are not new to you. Okay, so this is a group of rules that are in STC, in the specification. Some of the things you should and should not do. So many of the rules that you encounter as you look through the specs you're going to say, oh, well, I do that anyway, or I try to do that anyway. They're just common sense best practice rules. So there's nothing wrong with that. Now let's look at some examples. This is, again, these may not be as funny as the disabled story, but which, once again, swear that's a true story. But they are nonetheless accurate. For example, the word follow here. In STE, follow means one thing behind another. It doesn't mean obey. If you want to say obey the safety instructions, then say obey the safety instructions. Don't say follow, because follow doesn't mean that. It can, but only if you use it in two different ways. So don't. Use follow to mean I'll follow you to the store in my car. But use obey when you mean obey. It's one word. It can't mean anything else. Obey the safety instructions cannot be misinterpreted. It just can't. Test the pipe for leaks. This is a really common thing where we use a noun as a verb. And not improperly, don't get me wrong. To test, that's a perfectly good verb. But in STE, you want to avoid that kind of thing. So you would not say test the pipe for leaks, because test is used in controlled English as a noun, not as a verb. So what would you say? You would say do the leak test on the pipe, or perform the leak test on the pipe, depending on what the situation is. So these are things you got to watch. Here's another good example. Oil the hinges. Perfectly straightforward instruction, right? No, because oil is a noun and a verb, and you don't want to do that. So your STE restrictions are going to say don't use a noun as a verb. Oil is a perfectly good English verb, to oil, but don't use it that way. Use it for one thing. It's a noun. Use it as a noun. So how do you rewrite that? Well, you lubricate the hinges. With what? With oil, the noun. Am I making sense? Again, you can look at these things and go, well, yeah, well, sure. Makes good sense. But if you're not thinking about it as you write, it's way too easy to write the less clear versions of these. Oh, and here's one of my favorites. Oh, I skipped this one. Do not get close to the propeller. Close there is really, it's two different words. It's close and close, but it looks the same. So in STE, you use close to mean the opposite of open. Open the window, close the window, and you don't use close as a word meaning near or far away from. You use you say do not go near the propeller. Makes a lot more sense. It's more clear, and you avoid the word close or close in that ambiguous context. Now, I was about to say this is one of my favorites. Replace the filter. Now think about that. If you're replacing a filter, you've removed a filter, and your instruction reads replace the filter. What does that mean? Does it mean put it back, replace the filter, or does it mean discard the filter and install a new one? Well, if it means discard the old one and install a new one, say that. All right? Don't say replace the filter, because it's ambiguous. And the thing about STE and the I guess the single criterion that you can use when you write a sentence and think, does this conform? Does this make sense? The single question you can ask yourself is, can I interpret this sentence in more than one way? Period. Full stop. If you can, rewrite it. If there's a problem with a word where you've used a noun as a verb or whatever, if you can interpret it in more than one way, then it's probably not a good controlled language sentence. Think about these. You cannot misinterpret these sentences. Do not go near the propeller. Clear as day. Lubricate the hinges with oil. Clear as. You cannot read that wrong. But you certainly can the other versions. And so that's a big deal. And that's a really simple question to ask yourself. Can I interpret this sentence more than one way? Yes or no? Simple question. Okay. Let's look at a little more complex sentences here. I probably don't have to go through all of these. I'm halfway through. Good. We're doing all right. Place the water heater in a clean, dry spot as close as possible to the area of greatest usage. That's not a horrible sentence, but there are some problem words in it, one of which is place, because place is a noun. Okay? Spot is another problem sentence because spot is a noun. But does it mean a location or does it mean, oh, bloody hell, I got a spot on my shirt? What does that mean? Well, it depends on how you've defined it in your controlled language rules. So, a better way to say this would be put. Just say put, not place, put. Put the water heater in a clean, dry location that's unambiguous. You cannot read that wrong. You can't. Near the area where you use the most water. Simple as. This one I like a lot. Once again, I'm pointing where I can't reach. Check the paper's spelling before publishing. Now, I say that, and we all know what it means, but that's a very ambiguous sentence. It's like, what is that grand example? Time flies like an arrow. You've probably heard that one. You can spend an hour on that one. But I won't. Check the paper's spelling before publishing. What does that mean? Is the paper spelling something? Or do you actually mean, paper? Or do you mean a document? Is the paper publishing something? Paper's publishing? That's not a clear sentence at all. A much cleaner way to say that is you check the spelling of the document before you publish it. And that's not only cleaner, it's a perfectly acceptable way to address the reader. And that's one of the rules that you probably already know. Don't talk about the reader to the reader. Talk to the reader, right? Say, you should do this. And say, you should do this. You should check the spelling of the document before you publish it. Perfectly acceptable. Talk right to the reader. Don't talk about them. They're in the room. They're reading your document. Don't talk about them as though they're not there. Okay? And then this last one is, again, it's a firewall with multiple security layers. There's a lot of little problems in this sentence. Multiple is just useless. There's just no point in that word being there. It's not wrong. It just doesn't do anything. Working together, that phrase doesn't really give you any information. So this sentence has been rewritten to say the firewall has layers. These are so clean. It's nouns and verbs and adjectives, and they're very clean sentences. The firewall has layers of protection that find threats and prevent them from damaging your network. See all the articles in there? Now, did I not say a while ago that you might find some of these sentences are in fact longer than their original versions? And that's true because you start inserting articles and you start saying you where it was implied before and now you're going to be explicit. You might find you end up with more words occasionally, but that's okay because it's more clear. And then, oh dear, I'm not going to read you this one. I'll let you read it. But if you look at this in the context of not controlled language, it's not horrible. You could read that and make sense of it. But what if that were translated? Or what if somebody who's in Germany for whom English was a second language read that paragraph? It might be a lot harder to read. If you look at that paragraph and the rewritten version using STE rules, you'll find that the rewritten version is much clearer and can only be interpreted in one way. So there are words and phrases that are just too ambiguous. PC stand. Stand is a problem word. Screen and panel are problem words. I love that last sentence. For system operation, press the desired button okay. How about just to operate the system? There's a nice infinitive form of the verb. To operate the system, here's what you do. All right, so those are examples of controlled language. Now, you're probably asking yourself, or you probably want to ask me, and you should, couldn't any good editor just rewrite that paragraph? Again, that's not horrible, disgusting, terrible, but wouldn't a good editor just kind of tear into that paragraph and probably rewrite it? And couldn't that happen in almost any company? Everybody go like this. Sure. Say again? Only if you've got an editor. Good point, that. But sure you could, but if your writers are using controlled language rules at the outset, the editor doesn't have to. You don't have to. If when it leaves my desk as a writer, it already makes sense and cannot be misinterpreted, then my editor, if I have one, has a lot less work that they have to do because my documents already make sense. They're already unambiguous. That's what I'm striving for here. Specificity and unambiguousness. All right. So, how do we get this stuff? Well, first of all, you have to get your hands on the standards. I'm going to tell you how to do that in a minute. Second, you want to develop a corporate dictionary. I'll talk a little more about that. Third, you have to do some training. Third step is not optional. I'm big on that. And four, it's definitely to your advantage to get some software tools and use them. So let's talk a little more about that. Number one, acquire the standards. The specification is available, last time I checked, from the ASD-STAN organization. And that link there will take you to a place, or at least it used to, where you can purchase the documentation, but it's like 150 euros, at least it was at the time. You can also get this from the U.S. Air Transport Association for $200 US, or you can ask for it nicely for free for your own personal use. It's truly not for commercial use, but you can, what do I always say in my presentations? Get the stuff and play, right? Get free and cheap stuff and play with it till you figure it out. So you don't want to go pay $150, $200 for these specs when you're just trying to figure out what it's all about, right? So if you go to Boeing Research and Technology, you can generally get this, and they will. You can contact somebody there and say, "I'm just trying to learn what this is all about to see if my organization could make use of it. Can you send me a copy?" They will send you a watermarked copy that says "not for commercial use," but they'll send it to you for free, so that's a good thing. Okay, number two. Assuming that you get your hands on the specs, the next thing you need to do is develop your corporate dictionary. And this consists of a number of things. Number one is you just have to analyze your own TechPub's doc set. You have to look at your own doco and see what kinds of words you use most frequently, what you use them for, and so on. The first step to this is making a concordance. Everybody know what a concordance is? Some of you? Okay. A concordance is really a not very complicated thing. It's a list of words that you use in a document or set of documents and how often they're used, which ones are used most frequently, and so on. There's lots of software that will do this for you. But the next thing you need to do then is based on your own company's usage of the terms, you kind of need to do some linguistic analysis and look at your documents and see which terms you use and how you use them. To determine which terms are ambiguous, which ones mean the same thing all the time, and which ones you can throw out, and also which ones you use most frequently. Once you know which terms you use the most and what they mean and how you specifically use them, and I'll just take a little aside here, it might happen that you in your own industry or in your company, you might use a regular term differently from the way STE recommends it. That's okay, as long as you do it that way all the time. As long as you do it that way every single stinking time, that's okay. Write that into your own rule set, use it that way, and use it that way all the time. Just don't ever slip and go back and use it the other way, because then you will have, stepped on your own feet there. So what you end up doing by making this concordance and looking at the list of terms and so on is you end up making a fairly short list of approved terms and a fairly large list of unapproved terms. In other words, you'll find things like let's use close. You'll find words that are used for close or near or far and so on, and you'll put those over in your don't use these thesaurus list, and then you use near as your approved word for close. And close will end up being the opposite of open. Open a window, close a window, open a door, close a door, whatever. And you'll find that those terms will be carefully delineated then so that you know exactly how you're supposed to use them when you write your documentation. And remember, if you're using the spec, there's already guidelines about how to do this, how you create your documents and how you add words to the vocabulary and how you assign the the unapproved synonyms and all that stuff. So that's all in there. Number 3, training is essential. All right. I differentiate here between easy and simple, and this is almost a controlled language thing, where you think, well, doesn't easy and simple mean the same thing? And no, they don't. Writing in STE actually is easy, but it's not simple. There's a lot to it, but it's easy to do once you know what the rules are and so on. How do you know what the rules are unless you study the specs and get some training? Because what happens is this. We as writers, if we just have a set of the specs, we tend to focus on the vocabulary and kind of really home in on the details and sort of miss the big picture. One of the things that training will give your writers in controlled language is it'll give them the big picture. As I say here in that next bullet, the very best way to completely hork up your project, to completely derail it and run it into the ground, is to give your writers a copy of the spec and say, knock yourself out. Read the spec and go to it. Write controlled language. Never, 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 never work. Never work. Never, ever, ever work. Won't work. Will not work. So don't do that. Training is essential. You've got to teach people how to apply these rules. Don't just give them the rules and say you're on your own. You have to teach them how to apply the rules. Now, having said that, there is no accreditation process. The STC does not approve or accredit or endorse or certify any trainers in STC. And there's a lot of people out there who will train you on STC. So you have to be a little bit careful about who you choose for training. There is or was a good article here that outlined training requirements and gave some some links to companies that do that. And there's also a good article on training here. And yes, when I wrote this, that was actually the name of the page, raining.htm. There was no T. I think they may have fixed that, so you might try that both ways and see if either one of them works. They may have moved the page for all I know by now. But anyway, yeah, when I first went there, I went, wait, that's not right. Shouldn't that be training? And yes, of course it should, but it wasn't. So anyway, so when I wrote this slide, that's what the page name was, and it may have changed by now. So, training. And then fourth, you really need some software to help you do this. I guess if you had the specs and plenty of time, you could figure out how to do this on your own and analyze your documents on your own, but holy moly, what a giant task that would be. You don't want to do this by yourself. Get some software that does some of this stuff for you and automates it. There's various kinds of software. One creates a concordance, another does text mining, which grabs phrases out of your documents, and others will actually check your documents against STE rules and guidelines and do word checking against the vocab list, and that's really, really nice. So I'm going to show you some examples here of some currently available software tools, but I hasten to mention that just like trainers, the STE does not endorse or certify or recommend any specific software tool over another. You're on your own for this. These guys are in the business of maintaining the specification. They are not in the business of recommending trainers or software, and they religiously keep their hands off of that because they do not want to get into that legal battle. That's because that's a problem. You start recommending people, and then you hire that person, and that person does a crappy job, and then you sue the STE, and they just don't want any part of that. So they're trying desperately to avoid that. So let's look at some software. Here's one called Textens Concordance, and that's what it is. It's a concordance program. It will look at your document, figure out words and phrases that are used, count them, and tell you where they are, and give you some pointers so that you will know how you use these phrases and whether you use them consistently and so on. And for each software thing, I've got a little blurb here. Plus, I'm going to point this out. In all of these little blurbs, I grabbed these directly from the software manufacturer. So if there are typos or grammatical mistakes in there, there shouldn't be, should there? But if there are, I didn't put them there, okay? This tells you a little bit about what TextAnse does. It analyzes your document content and makes a concordance for you. Gives you words and phrases and different parts of speech and so on, and lists them for you so you can find which ones you use most frequently, and more importantly, how you use them, whether you use them consistently or not. So that's what a concordance will do for you, and that's one. Here's another one called concordance. I think they had a hard time coming up with new names for this, because what they really do is they produce a bloody concordance. And what else are you going to call them? All right, this one's called concordance. At the time of this writing, it was 3.2. Could be, 19.4 by now. Who knows? This one does a similar thing to TextAnse, which is it analyzes your document, sorts the words, tells you how many times you use them, where you use them. You can look at them and see whether you're using them consistently or not. There's the URL and a little blurb about concordance. All of this, of course, is in. You don't feel like you have to write this down. These are all on the slides that are on your flash drive that Steve handed out with your bags. Acrolinks. Acrolinks is a kind of an interesting product. Many of these little software programs are standalone guys. In other words, they're just a program that runs on your PC, and you feed your documents into it, and they do the analysis and so on. Acrolinks is kind of a broader sort of software, and it, generally speaking, it links by using plugins to these different editors. And if you can't see those, it's Word, PowerPoint, Excel, misspelled, I might add, 2 L's, Excel, Arbor Text Editor, which is a popular editor, FrameMaker, and Xmetal, that's one of Uncle Dave's favorites. I love me some Xmetal, I do. So Acrolinks actually tends to work as a plug-in to a lot of other powerful editors. So if you have one of these editors, if you use one of these software packages in your company, Acrolinks might be a good choice, because you could say, well, I'm a FrameMaker shop. So if this integrates with Frame, I could integrate it, use the plugin, and work within my familiar editing environment and not have to learn a whole new software package. So that's kind of the thing about Acrolinks. However, this is interesting because Acrolinks includes best practice writing standards. It includes ASD STE 100, which is the spec that we've been talking about for an hour. It can do technical German, standard technical Japanese, and global English. So you've got some settings there that you can control to say, well, look at it from this viewpoint or look at it from that viewpoint, and you might end up with some different results. And of course, again, they're customized by use of plugins for a lot of different editors. So that's kind of an interesting package. And there's a fairly well-known, very popular one. These guys are always at the Wiesbaden conference, the TC World conference in Germany, TED Press. They have a product called Simplified Technical English, STE, Hyper STE, and it's also a very popular product. And their little blurb here. Let's see, I think these guys have been around maybe longer than a lot of the others. It lets you define your own vocabulary and make sure that the documents that you pass to it comply with the specs, which is, of course, a nice feature. And it's interactive, so you can make corrections and so on the fly. So that's TED Press. And these companies are all easily findable on the web, and some of them no doubt have trial versions and that sort of thing. If you're interested in downloading a trial version and give something a shot. Now, there's this other little company called Smart Communications. They have a couple of different pieces of software that are sort of interesting. The first one is Maxit Checker. Maxit Checker does specific STE 100 checking against a document that you send to it. So it checks grammar rules and stylistic rules and vocabulary and approved and unapproved words and so on. Does all that kind of stuff. You can also integrate it with other editors, but I think it's primarily a standalone piece of software. And Let me go back here. One of the interesting things, you may hate this, but one of the interesting things it does is it inserts links and little pop-ups to tell you different pieces of information about the words and phrases that it finds. I think that's kind of interesting, but that whole color-coded thing could get annoying in a hurry, I think. You know, if you had to look at that all day. But initially, it's like, oh, that's kind of cool, but it might really get annoying after a while, so you might not like that one. Anyway, that's Maxit Checker. Now, Maxit Checker works with another of Smart Communications programs called Smart Text Miner, and that's exactly what it does. This little program extracts the text from your documents or databases even, and it can build dictionaries for you that you can then turn around and use with your STE rules. So that's handy. It will help build you a dictionary out of the words that you actually use. Not just a dictionary of stuff that we think you ought to be using, but words that you actually use will help build that dictionary so that you can then turn around and use that in your own documents. Okay. And then finally, remember I mentioned you can actually get the STE 100 docs, the spec from Boeing. Boeing themselves have a simplified English checker program that has rules and grammar and so on based on the STE standard, and will flag items that aren't compliant. This is also, along with, what did I say, Tetapress, this is also one of the more popular packages, the Boeing package. And I don't know what these guys cost. So, and probably if I had checked just before I came down here, I'd be wrong anyway. So I don't know. You might check, but I suspect that most of them will have some trial versions. So let's sum up here. What can controlled language do for you? Well, from a corporate standpoint, it's going to save you money. I mean, I know we all care so very much that our bosses save money, but when our bosses save money, sometimes we're employed longer. So, that can be a good thing. For us as authors, it can improve our ability to write clean and clear and unambiguous documents for our readers. And again, and I know we joke about this, but we do this for the readers. And controlled language can really help us create documentation that is more easily read and comprehended by readers, especially even readers all over the world who can read the same document and comprehend it in exactly the same way instead of getting two different meanings out of it because their native language may be different. Again, controlled language is fairly easy to start using. You can look at the specs and suss out some rules and say, well, that makes sense, but don't stop there, whatever you do, because that will derail your project. It's hard to really use it well and comprehensively, but companies that do it really swear by it because it saves them so much time and so much money in the long run. And actually, I didn't mention translation again, but if you do any localization at all, how many of you here work for companies who do some localization? Okay, maybe a third. I expected more than that, but if you do any localization at all, simplified English can really save you boatloads of money there because you can, again, write a paragraph once, write it correctly and simply one time and store it, and then reuse it by reference later, transcluding it into other areas and other documents, and then that only has to be translated once when you send it out to your translation service. Instead of every single time it occurs, they only have to translate that once, and it saves you a lot of money and a lot of time. Controlled language will simplify your job. Actually, it makes writing documents easier because you don't have to fumble for the right word. You don't have to think, how can I be creative? How can I finesse this sentence here? Don't do that. Remember, write clearly and unambiguously. It can improve your skills and improve your marketability. And I know many of you have heard me say this before. I'm going to say it again. A very smart man, my brother, has always told me, anytime you can learn anything, that's good. Anytime you can get some dumb arse to pay you to learn something, that's great. It doesn't get any better than that. Let your company pay you to get smarter. I try to do that every place I go. Every time I take a contractor, go into a company, I go in not knowing everything about what they do, and they just pay me to learn. It's wonderful. That's what you should do too. Experiment. Play with these technologies and let your company pay you to get smarter. How many people here think you will always work for the company you're working for right now the rest of your life? Raise your hands. Don't lie to me. One person. There you go. Me too. One person. Okay. You can always take skills with you. And if you can get some company to pay you to learn skills that you can take elsewhere the rest of your life, that's a good deal. That's all I'm saying. So, and I always say that, but it's so absolutely 100% true. So, I think we're all done. How's my look at it? Doing pretty good. Okay, so I came out okay on my time. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to entertain them, or I'll be here for today and tomorrow as well. Oh, and the first thing that everybody needs to learn to do is use a microphone. All right? When you hold a microphone to ask a question, put it here. Put it here. Don't hold it out here. That's what causes feedback. Put it here. Okay. No pressure, but yeah, no, not here. Right here. There you go. Go for it. See, you can hear her, right?
Yeah. I appreciate the translation savings that would definitely be made if you were implementing controlled language in your source language for the first time. But if you've already gone through the translation process and spent the money, implementing this is going to incur quite considerable costs if you implement it at a later stage. So it's okay if you're just starting out in the localization process at the beginning, but if you're implementing it after you've already localized,
okay,
then you have to justify the additional cost to the business, and just wondering, might be a bit of a battle.
I think that was more a remark than a question, but tell me if I misquote you. I think that observation was, this is all well and good for translation purposes if you're just starting out, if you're writing documents that you need to send out for translation. But if you have a world of legacy documents that have already been translated, this may not help you very much because you've already spent that money to have it translated, right? I can't argue with that. The only mitigating idea I can give you is that if you can locate pieces of like information that have already been translated, throw out the copies in both the translated and the English versions and replace them with transclusion references so that next time they have to be translated, it won't cost you twice, it'll only cost you once. And that's not much of a response, but it's a very good observation. If you've already gone through the whole translation effort and spent the money, this may or may not really buy you very much cost savings. I can't argue with that. Good observation. Okay.
One more question, and then we have our refreshment break.
Woohoo!
Okay. Can you comment about, while this is specifically for technical communicators, in a largely technical-focused organisation, how does this sit with the rest of the company? I mean, to me, it makes sense to make everyone do it.
Okay, I think this
You
question...
comment on that?
I think this question is assuming that the technical communicators, that the tech pubs department embraces this. How does it sit with the rest of the company? Is that... Oh, can you roll it out to the rest of the company? Like marketing and so on? Fascinating question. I'm going to guess probably not. That's a really fine question. Well, marketing likes their vague words. They like their fuzz words. Oh, sure they do. They love to be vague and fancy and creative. They're not so much on specificity as we are as technical communicators. Yes? Sure. Knock yourself out. No, I see what you're saying, and I had actually never considered that before. But that is an interesting way to think of it, as where do these concepts and words start, kind of. Like marketing concepts sort of flow forward. Is that what you're saying? So that, yes, the language flows forward, yep. I get it. The only thing I can say is I can't argue with the philosophy, but I think in practice you'd find that's very, very difficult to get marketing people type to accept that sort of thing. But I don't know because I've never tried it. So, all right, I'm done. Thank you very much. Emily, you're back. Thanks, everyone.